Before we request our next speaker to come on stage, one request to everybody present here. If you have questions, then you may please write them down on a piece of paper. Everybody has been provided the same. And pass it on to Manu. Manu, please raise your hand. He and his team will have it collected from you. Please be seated. And he will have it collected from each one of you. Few questions will be selected and responded to. 4 questions will be given a surprise prize from the organizers. Thank you.
Okay,
David Frawley.
Sorry, Ruchi, please hold on. Just have a panel discussion now.
Okay. We now proceed for panel discussion.
Yeah. After that, whatever questions have been asked from Yusuf, from Tufel, please bring them over. In the context of soft power, of course, you quoted General Krishna Swami towards the end saying that whatever we have won in the battles, we have lost in the negotiations. So is it an aspect of soft power, or is it an aspect of character? I mean, the cultural or civilizational character of Indians, how do you relate them to the soft power aspect? Can you really plan for soft power?
Soft power, a nation gets its soft power over a period of like centuries, many centuries. And most often, soft power is generated without government support. But in modern times, we do think that it's possible to get it through government support as well to generate, multiply our soft power status across the world. Is it character? In soft power, there has to be some kind of intellectual element. And that is where I am concerned. That my concern is because when we discuss soft power in current discourse in India, political discourse about foreign policy, about Pakistan, about friendship with Pakistan, this is a kind of a negative reaction from us because we are basically hiding behind soft power because we cannot use military power, hard power. So I'll say that yes, it's also character. I mean, there has to be an element of character to it. And I think that answers.
We have questions. In fact, we were hoping to have more questions so that we could screen them out. But we got only 2 questions here. Mr. D.R. Mehta, who is an ex-chairman of SEBI, is very much here. He himself is a reflection of Rajasthan soft power. Sir, you could go ahead with your question.
Thank you for a very nice presentation. Many aspects of soft power you mentioned are very valid. However, 2 aspects or dimensions need to be addressed. One is, we are talking about Ayurveda, which is a great thing. But what about allopathic treatment? Thousands and thousands of people, you travel from, I had been to Afghanistan several times. When you come by plane, at least more than half the plane comprises the patients coming to India and getting treatment. Equally true of Pakistan, Middle East. Even from America, many of the people want to have their treatment treatment taken here because of the inexpensiveness and also because of high quality. The doctors who worked in America, now they are working in India. Equipment is from that place, but the cost is so low. So this aspect needs to be promoted by the government. It's happening on its own, but it needs a special encouragement. In this context, I will also mention Jaipur Food. He mentioned it. It is the largest organization for providing limbs in the world. I'm not saying this. Time magazine says this, USA. And it is generating so much of goodwill. Iraq, Pakistan, Afghanistan, 27 countries we operated, and believe me, the kind of goodwill it generates for India is enormous. Needs to be promoted. Not only by the social organization, they have their own limitations of funds and various other organizational problems, but officially also, just as yoga is being promoted, this also needs to be promoted. Secondly, the yoga has been highlighted. Government persuaded even UN to recognize yoga and declare a day as Yoga Day. But only physical yoga is being promoted. What about meditation? It's already taking place. I was reading a book on Buddhism published in America that said about 4 to 6 million people got converted to Buddhism just because of yoga. Transcendental meditation. Sri Ravi Shankar. I was amazed. I went to Iraq and the very prominent politician, he hosted Sri Ravi Shankar. Transcendental meditation.
Could you keep it short?
And just a minute finish. The last point is about Vipassana. Such a popular thing. So just as government is promoting yoga, which is physical yoga presently, it also should promote meditational yoga. Thank you. What do you say on this?
Yes, there is no question. I mean, we all agree that India's heritage in
I think we agree with whatever you say. On this.
I tend to agree with you that yoga, vipassana and everything, and Indian civilization has this cosmic view that needs to be promoted across the world. It will be relevant. But when we are talking of power, we are talking of whether India can influence the behavior of other states through this soft power, and that I do not see happening much. I mean, we can do much better. Okay.
Professor J.P. Sharma. Will you ask or should I read out your question? So, Professor J.P. Sharma asked whether you consider Indian social institutions like family, marriage, joint family, values and ethos, religious beliefs as a dimension of soft power.
I mean, can family values influence the behavior of other states? That is something to think about. But I've been a student of sociology, and I think, yes, family values are important. Institution of family is also important. But as always, like there is always a negative and positive sides to both. It is through the institution of family that casteism is promoted. It is through institution of family that religion is promoted. So, I mean, our India's institution, joint family system or family system, we have to see things in a very, very dynamic process. Right? Are we able to question and as well as rebuild those institutions? So the answer is 50% yes, 50% no. Thank you.
Tariq Fateh would like to take that question.
Your family values are not your soft power. They are against you. Ask your daughters-in-law and they'll tell you what they think about joint family system. Ask your mother-in-laws to every 20-year-old bride and she'll tell you. Anytime you promote a family system that excludes people, you cannot promote it as a family value. That excludes black people, that excludes gays and lesbians, that excludes women as equal, that do not allow women to fall in love, that put their ads in matrimonial pages where everyone asks for a fair and lovely bride. They are in your newspapers. That's the soft power you don't want.
I think you had your answer, Professor J.P. Sharma. The next question is from Mani Mohan or Manmohan, I don't know. Who asked that question? Could you please stand up? Yeah, please stand up. The question is interesting. Say that Pakistanis love Bollywood. Is that also the reason they hate us?
Sorry, I didn't get Pakistanis.
Pakistanis love Bollywood. Is that also the reason they hate us?
No. Bollywood teaches love and brotherhood, and when these movies are watched on the other side of the border, it is only when Pakistan's identity based on religion comes in this process that it becomes some kind of hate. They are the same people. Just before 1947, they were like us. But there has been a change in their mindset, in their discourse. So we cannot say that Bollywood is the region as such. Yeah, thank you.
As someone who has been to Pakistan, they see that as entertainment, nothing else, nothing more. The hatred of India, even to those who are charmed by their brief visits to Pakistan, come back as delusional. That's Pakistan's soft power, not yours. It's your weakness that you assume certain things. The viciousness of the Pakistani state and the state of mind, or your inability to distinguish between what Pakistan is India's, what I would call solar plexus. Getting punched, you don't even know what hit you. Any movie would be entertaining if it is accessible to the masses and if they're not producing their own dance dramas. And if you think that Bollywood is Indian soft power, it may be soft power for Iceland where the film is shot, or Paris, or Tokyo, but these are not the films of Raj Kapoor or Dilip Kumar. These are the films of people who are completely cut off from the Republic of India, in which Vivek the film said really rightly. You now create a scenario you don't even have villains. All you have is entertainment, dance, drama. That's not India. India is a billion people suffering with miles to go. And your films don't show.
Yes, final question, Professor. It is in Hindi. I think you understand. भारत का सॉफ्ट पावर डॉक्टर ओमेंद्र रत्नू, you stand up? Yeah. भारत का सॉफ्ट पावर इस्लाम के धुर विस्तारवाद का प्रतिकार कैसे कर सकेगा? How will Indian soft power tackle the Islamic core standing?
It's a good question. You know, जो लोग रेगिस्तान में रहते हैं, स्पेशली नदी के किनारे और समुद्र के किनारे, उनको ये मालूम होगा कि when you go to the banks, तो आप देखेंगे कि रात को कोई जानवर कोई एनिमल पास किया है तो उसके फुटप्रिंट्स होते हैं. तो कुछ फुटप्रिंट्स हम लोग देख सकते हैं. मिसाल के तौर पे 7th century में मक्का से मूवमेंट ऑफ आइडिया शुरू होता है. As a consequence of this movement, उसका एक फुटप्रिंट ये है कि वहाँ पे कोई जीव नहीं है, बचे नहीं. ये एनिमल जो कह लीजिए या मूवमेंट ऑफ आइडियाज़ कह लीजिए, ये जब ईरान जाता है तो वहाँ पे जोरोस्ट्रियन नहीं बचते हैं, मतलब 2-4 बच गए होंगे, गायब हैं. When it enters the Indian subcontinent, बलूचिस्तान, अफगानिस्तान, पाकिस्तान, वहाँ पे जो सिविलाइजेशन थी, सेंचुरीज थी, वो गायब हो चुकी है. लाहौर जो कि अभी 1947 तक सिख मेट्रोपोलिस था, इट इज़ नो लॉन्गर ए सिख मेट्रोपोलिस. तो सिविलाइजेशन उसके स्टैम्प्स में फुटप्रिंट्स हर जगह दिखाई देते हैं, लेकिन ये खत्म नहीं हुआ. इन्हीं के आज़ादी के बाद खत्म हो गए. 1947 के बाद मेरी लाइफ टाइम में कश्मीर में इसका फुटप्रिंट ये है कि हिंदूज नहीं हम जिसको एंड वी डोंट फाइट. सो क्या हम कुछ कर सकते हैं? मुझे लगता है कि कुछ पॉसिबल है इंडियन स्टेट को करने के लिए, लेकिन हम इंटेलेक्चुअली कैपेबल नहीं हैं कि शायद वो करें. और मैं ये कहता हूँ कि एजुकेशन सिस्टम, इफ यू गेट इट राइट, इंडिया के एजुकेशन सिस्टम में तो शायद बहुत कुछ ठीक हो सकता है। मिसाल के तौर पे हमें एक बुक इंट्रोड्यूस करने की ज़रूरत है कि वो वी आर ग्रेड 1, ग्रेड 2 टू ग्रेड 12। उस बुक में हम ये पढ़ाएं कि हम कौन थे, कहाँ से आए, हमारी सिविलाइजेशन की क्या थी, लैंग्वेज क्या थी, हड़प्पा, मोहनजोदड़ो, इंडस वैली सिविलाइजेशन, उससे पीछे थे। लेकिन हम वो करेंगे, दैट आई एम नॉट श्योर। एक कॉन्फ्रेंस में पुणे में मुझे मौलाना महमूद मदनी साहब से डिस्कशन हो गया, तो उन्होंने कहा कि हम इस्लाम को बदलना चाहते हैं तो ही डोंट टेक, बेसिकली बदल दीजिए। इस्लाम इज नॉट गोइंग टू चेंज एंड कुरान इज नॉट गोइंग टू चेंज, दैट्स क्लियर। लेकिन हमारे पास एक हिस्टोरिकल मॉडल है। लॉर्ड मैकॉले को हम लोग गाली देते रहते हैं, बट वी कैन लर्न अ लॉट फ्रॉम हिम। इफ लॉर्ड मैकॉले कुड डू इट, Indian democracy can do it much better. Thank you.
Now I'll request Dr. David Frawley to please.
Namaste, Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. It is my great honor to be with you today at the Jaipur Dialogues, which is one of the most innovative ideas and breakthrough conference formats that I have seen. And I'm very happy that our friend Sanjay Dixit has inaugurated that in India. And I'm very proud to be part of the first of the Jaipur Dialogues. I'm very honored also to be with my friends Tufail Ahmed and Tariq Fatah, who are among the most dynamic thinkers and critics, but also those who are showing the way for the future to deal with this dialogue clash of civilizations, culture that is going on today. And I'm very happy to be with you all as an informed audience to examine the deeper and more profound questions facing India and facing the world today. I have myself been working in the field of Vedic education for several decades now, the fields of yoga, Ayurveda, Vedanta, Jyotish, Vedic studies, ancient history. And it's also, over time, allowed me to be aware of the issues also facing modern India and to address sometimes in some people's minds more controversial social, political, and cultural issues. But I think these are also extremely important today. Our topic of soft power is extremely interesting, and hard power. So I want to first put this in a certain perspective and historical narrative. India, or Bharat, is not just a nation coming from 1947, or a country, but it is a great civilization. In fact, I would say it is probably the greatest civilization in the world from the standpoint of spirituality, consciousness, art, culture. It hasn't maybe developed the science and technology as quickly as other parts of the world, but it has certainly been able to adapt them as well. The unfortunate thing is that many people in India and abroad see India from 1947 as that is what India was. So let's take a quick look at that. India is not only, we could say, great in terms of its literature, its history, its gurus, and all the wonderful traditions on various levels. India was the dominant civilization in Asia throughout most of history. And we can see this in the spread of the Indic civilization throughout Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Indochina, as far as the Philippines. Its domination spiritually of China, it spread to Japan, where you still have Vedic deities worshipped today, even to Korea. It also had a profound influence on Central Asia, extending to West Asia, Europe, particularly before the Islamic period, but even to some extent afterwards. And we can see in the architecture, the names of countries of these regions, India's civilizational influence, which was largely, people say, a soft power influence. But I must say that India has never denied hard power. And there was hard power in the spread of India's civilization, not only in terms of trade, but movement of kings, soldiers, ships, travel, and all of that. So we know that vast civilizational expanse from India was diminished and cut off during the Islamic period, starting from mainly from the 13th to the 15th centuries, where it reached where Indonesia fell under Islam. But the impact of that is still there. And the Indian civilization survived, again, both by hard power and by soft power. In India, there was never a surrender on the battlefield. There was continual fighting that led to the arising of various Hindu Indian kingdoms, Vijayanagar, the Marathas, and so forth, all the way up to the independence movement. And even though there was the great Islamic assault on India and the British, European, and Christian assault on India, India's civilization and culture survived. Its soft power particularly survived. Then we witnessed two things in the late 19th century. The Indian independence movement began, and at the same time, Swami Vivekananda began to introduce the Indian culture and civilization throughout the world, and got a very wonderful, unexpected, and tremendous response, even though at that time India was under colonial rule and missionary assault, and there was no real support or defense of what he was doing. The Indian independence movement was also based on India's soft power, bringing back the Vedas and Arya Samaj, the great emphasis on the Bhagavad Gita, Karma Yoga, Dharma, Ram Raja, and we see this throughout the Indian independence movement up to 1947. But what happened in India after 1947 was a great tragedy. The mindset that achieved independence was basically abandoned, and the intelligentsia, the intellectuals who came to run the country, were not those who believed in India or had a connection to its soft power, but were following socialist, we know the Nehruvian mentality, European ideas. And so instead of embracing and expanding India's great culture and soft power, they tried to suppress it. They created an educational system that was anti-India, anti-Bharat, denigrating its own culture. And so because of that, I would say India has the greatest soft power in the world, but it is not being used. It hasn't been used, and the government has not recognized it or supported it until recently, even though historically it had such tremendous power. So without a revival of the soft power, then the spread of the Indian values, culture, everything is weakened. In fact, soft power supports and also to some extent precedes hard power. If you don't have any civilization, cultural values, strength, traditions, then your ability to influence the world at intellectual, cultural, and diplomatic levels becomes weakened. So we see the strange phenomenon that India's soft power has spread without any government support, whether it's yoga, Ayurveda, meditation, mantra, these traditions embraced by the Western world. And many of these people don't give India credit for these traditions because they haven't been presented to them in an Indian context. In fact, let me tell you a little story. We were in Italy some years ago, and the Italian Hindu Union, which was able to get Hinduism recognized as a legal religion in Italy, had a gathering, and they invited all the major, what you would call high commissioners, or all the major diplomats of different countries in Italy to come to their inaugural event for this. And the ambassador or the high commissioner from India declined to come, even though Turkey, people from France, Russia all came, because he said India is a secular country. So this idea of secularism was invented to a great extent to suppress or to deny the Indian culture and civilization. Now, even the writing of the textbooks was taken over by the Marxists, and we had ancient history, Vedas, run by people who had no sympathy, no understanding, and no appropriate mindset. Some years ago, 15 years ago, I did a program at JNU on ancient India, Aryan invasion, and at the end, we were wondering what the questions would be. It was a big audience, and there were only 2 questions, but the last question was very interesting. One of the students said, "We accept that there was no Aryan invasion. You've given us adequate information. That is probably historically correct." But he said, "However, because that information supports Hindu nationalist politics, it should be suppressed even if it's true." And I think this tells us what the mentality is. So what India has done, particularly through the media and the academia and the previous governments, is brought in the same old type of colonial Marxist missionary mentality to judge the country, to present its traditions, and even to aid in their denigration globally. But in spite of that, India's soft power has developed and spread and continues to do so. So finally, we have a government, through starting with issues like Yoga Day, is able to express India's soft power and getting a wonderful respect and regard for it. The Prime Minister of Japan's happy to come to a Shiva temple and Varanasi, which previous groups and civilizations or administrations were unable to do. And here, I want to draw a contrast to so-called communist China, which still the votaries of the left in India like to look up to. Communist China is starting Confucian schools throughout the country. Why are there no Vedic schools coming up throughout India today? There aren't any, except on a private level, nothing with the government's support. Russia has thrown out its communists, and it is now honoring the czars and going back to the older history of its country. Yet India, which was never under direct communist rule, has not been rejecting or throwing out that group of leftist, Marxist, anti-national thinkers. Chinese communists were never anti-national. Indian communists were rare, if ever, pro-national, and their imprint is still there. So what happened in China, there was this cultural revolution that destroyed a lot of the traditions, very bad. Then they threw that out. In India, there was a cultural revolution also, emphasized by groups like JNU, or even now, even the NDTV is trying to continue that to some degree. But there hasn't also been a movement away from that. So India needs to reclaim its soft power, first of all in India itself, and then also spread it to the rest of the world. In fact, the same Vedic, yogic subjects that are often looked down upon in the Indian context are being embraced by the more aware, affluent, educated people from throughout the Western world. And India's soft power has the same potential to influence the world that it once had to influence Asia. The dharmic ideas of India's great traditions are the most relevant for the 21st century, where the dominant science is going to be the science of consciousness. And is that science of consciousness that has been most developed in the India context. Even in our work with the Ayurvedic medicine, there is no other system of natural healing in the world that is so complex, profound, integrated, detailed, whether it's in preparation of herbs, diagnosis, and treatment. And yet, even in the India context, it has very little support. There has been now finally an Ayush minister that has been created, but the educational system of Ayurveda also needs to be revamped in light of the older traditions of India, traditional Ayurveda, and bringing in the more spiritual and psychological dimensions as well. China, throughout the world, has been spreading its natural healing herbal systems, its cultural traditions, its Gung Fu, Tai Chi, all these different things. It is also at its embassies promoting Chinese culture, Chinese language, going back to Confucian. India needs to do that. One of our friends, Lokesh Chandra, has become the head of the ICCR, or the Indian Council of Cultural Relations, and says the ICCR should be used to promote cultural nationalism and spread the message of India's civilization overseas. In previous administrations, it was just simply used for entertainment and kind of very superficial artistic connections, and never really projected a positive or integrated view of India's civilization. Now, why did the Nehruvian generation reject this connection with Bharat and ancient India? Because they felt it was politically and electorally against them. They continued the divide and rule policy of the British. And the same side effect was lack of a sense of nationalism and cultural unity in India. India has often been perceived of as a soft state on the verge of collapse, not as this fierce nationalist movement that the left has seen. And what India needs is national unity, cultural integration, recognizing the value of its ancient traditions, modernizing them in the current context, and also recognizing their ability to be of benefit for the whole of humanity. Even Samuel Huntington, in his class of civilizations, identified India and Hinduism as one of the great civilizations of the world. And yet, there's very little to spread it. Every Islamic country is promoting Islam in every possible forum throughout the world. I'll give you an example. Saudi Arabia has spent hundreds of millions of dollars giving donations for Islamic chairs for the major universities in the United States, and you'll find that there will be very little criticism of Islam going on. Even in America today, you will find them still having conferences on sati, for example, or anything that criticizes India. But now, even the study of jihad is not really allowed anymore because the Saudi money that has come into that particular context. So this suppression of India's soft power needs to come to an end. There needs to be educational media factors, academic changes to bring that about. It is going to take some degree of time. Social media has helped open the door in some ways, but much more needs to be done on these fronts. I raised the call for what we call intellectual kshatriya in India some years ago. It's not just a question of being nice to everybody. You have to have a tradition of dialogue, debate, criticism, and the cultural wars which are going on in the world today, the media wars, the information wars, require that there is the appropriate response from the defenders of the Indian or Bharatiya civilization and extending to India as a country itself. This is a process or a practice that needs to be strengthened, and I'm very happy to note that the Jaipur Dialogues is at the forefront of projecting this process, but a new thinking, a new manthan needs to go on of taking the essence of the Indic Dharmic civilization, awakening it in India, and being able to spread it worldwide. At the same time, I also must agree with Tarek. What we call soft power is not enough. You also have to have the hard power. And India's soft power has been misinterpreted a little bit in modern times. And I will make a point that Lokesh Chandra, who is the head of ICCR and the foremost Buddhist scholar probably in the world today, at least in India, has said, ahimsa was never a state policy. Ahimsa, that is, nonviolence, no weapons, no confrontation, no struggle, no expansion, was never a state policy in India, whether in the Hindus or the Buddhists. And the Kshatriya Dharma, if we look at the Mahabharata, Krishna advised Arjuna to fight. Kshatriya ahimsa is not never using weapons. Kshatriya ahimsa is an active policy to reduce the harm going on in the world, even if it may require taking up some arms to reduce that. And it's not just a question of India being a cooperative, non-confrontation, accepting civilization. India's history has always represent the spread of Dharma. Dharma must spread, and in the process, enemies of Dharma, whether they're at an ideological level or at a outer level, even social, political level, must be removed. Dharma cannot survive by a process of accommodation with adharma. Certain lines have to be drawn. So there needs to be a deeper understanding also of India's tradition and how it has integrated the soft power and the hard power. And the soft power has provided the ideas, the motivation, the philosophy, the culture, the values behind the hard power, so that the hard power follows a deeper orientation and dharmic perspective. That is India's view. But we have to be totally realistic about the state of the world. You are not dealing with idealistic people. You are dealing with entrenched forces, largely adharmic, that are going to promote their point of view in every possible way. They are rarely interested in dialogue. Their approach is more of negation, denial. And since India has not occupied its space in the world of either soft power or hard power, no one is going to give India that place on the stage unless India takes it and moves forward in a dynamic and confident manner. And that is what I think Prime Minister Narendra Modi is doing today. He has put the cause of India on the global stage. He has identified India as its own civilization. It's not the non-aligned movement where India speaks for everybody and nobody. There needs to be an India-aligned foreign policy that establishes India as a center around which other cultures and values of a dharmic nature can come. And that process is now being set in motion. It needs more strength. It needs more articulation. But I believe that parivartana, that movement and change, has occurred for the future. And now we must go forward boldly to project both India's soft power and India's hard power, not in a crude, aggressive way, but with the confidence of Dharma and spreading and reviving this great, venerable civilization that has always honored the deepest aspirations of humanity and had a vision of not only the unity of all human beings, but the unity of the universe itself, and a model that can bring peace and harmony everywhere. But to do that, there must be the confidence to bring it forth. Namaste.
That was an excellent presentation, Dr. Frawley, as always. Now, I think it's become a bit fashionable in our circles these days to talk about China's rising soft power and juxtaposing India's soft power with China. But just to think of it, that for nearly 50, 60 years, after 1949, when the Maoists took over China, I think they spared no effort in trying to absolutely obliterate every sign of Chinese civilization. And in spite of that, that civilization ultimately beat them back and is back in focus. So, once again, coming to that, the question that I asked Tufail, whether the government efforts do have any relevance in projecting soft power.
Well, you have to understand that China did try to beat them back. They did tremendous damage to the culture, and many traditions were undermined and lost. Again, one difference is China, although always had a nationalistic orientation and didn't allow a kind of internationalistic domination. So government influence does make a difference, and particularly overseas. For example, if you can see what happened with the Yoga Day. When India as a country took yoga back, then people, oh yeah, of course, yoga comes from India. But before that had occurred, the whole yoga movement was gradually de-Indianizing because of that lack of focus or place. So I think that this reclaiming of soft power is important, and this spreading of it can also be important economically, diplomatically, and in many other ways. So India has to be India. India has to be Bharat, and to project those traditions and values to the world, it will gain more respect for doing that.
We have some questions. One question, Vakisha Joshi. Could you please start up? This is a good question, I think. Is soft power related to identity? And if it is, why locate it only in ancient history?
Soft power is related to identity and also to culture, cultural history. For example, the soft power of the British is also going to be rooted in the British literature, the soft power of Europe and its culture. But there is an identity there, but it's also a cultural identity. And we're not looking at promoting soft power as ethnicity. See, these are, or as nationalism in the European sense of dominating and controlling other people. But there is a national identity. India does have a national identity, Bharatiya, cultural ethos. India has multiculturalism, other countries have multiculturalism, but there are certain characteristics, and also when you go from Kedarnath to Kanyakumari, there are certain similarities of culture, there are festivals, language issues, Diwali, etc. India is obviously a much more unified culture and civilization today than Europe is. And yeah, we wouldn't in ancient because India's identity goes back to the origins of history. Just as the Chinese are also rooting their history and rooting their identity in the ancient. But the ancient, the continuity from there. It's not like we're asking people to act like people, dress like people did 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 years ago, or adapt their particular law codes, but to recognize that continuity of the Indian Bharatiya civilization is essential for not only the cultural unity, but for bringing out the full potential that has been developed here for so long.
No, sorry, no supplement. Next question is from Atul Vyas. This is a very interesting take. It says that you are talking about India's soft power within India, but even within India, there have been various facts. For instance, the Vedic culture as opposed to the Quranic culture.
Well, I would not entirely agree with that. There have been changes over time. The Puranic culture was actually rooted in the Vedic culture. You can find the Vedic rishis there, you can find the Vedic king list there, you can find description of Vedic rituals and practices. There are changes and adaptations over time, which are always necessary. And even today, you'll notice that Swami Vivekananda brought in certain new ideas and innovations gurus today are also bringing in those. So there is a continuity, but it is not simply, the scholars often like to look for discontinuity. There's much more continuity I have found there than simply discontinuity. But that continuity is also a tradition of inquiry, debate, discovering truth for yourself through meditation, rather than just simply repeating the formulas of the past.
Is from Mr. S. Disa. He said, do you think Sanskrit literature of these scriptures are also the best soft power in India? And if yes, then the government should get into this activity.
Sanskrit is an important part of India's soft power. And it should be promoting the Sanskrit, reviving the Sanskrit. It should be part of India's agenda, even to some extent overseas. I have to tell you that today there are more people doing Sanskrit mantras and chants in the world than ever. There are millions of people doing these in the Western world. They may not necessarily know the Sanskrit language. Fortunately, Indology is coming to an end, which was kind of the colonial, not only study, but almost denigration of the Indian civilization. But the study of India's Dharmic traditions is growing, and also from inside the tradition views and schools. Also, we must recognize that what India needs to do, and also at a cultural level, is you can't rely on the government for everything. Every temple should also be a school. Every temple should promote education. And you need your own schools for promoting spiritual, religious, yogic subjects. That should be a priority in the communities, and that is what we see also developing overseas. But even there, the educational side needs to be developed more. You must have your own institutions also.